Hey pals, welcome to a new video. Today, I thought I would just give a little bit of a classic style vlog about the work that I've been doing in the last little while and just where I'm at in terms of my mental health and projects and just a personal update, I guess. So I'm making this video in the kind of wake of a new lockdown introduced here in New South Wales, where I live in Australia. So basically in the last whole year, we've been in lockdown for maybe a month of that time. We had a little bit in like May and a little bit in December, and now it's happening for the third time. So we are not as used to, I guess, that kind of mentality. And so I've been feeling a little bit down, but been doing a lot of cleaning and preparing for the next couple of weeks. So that's why I thought it would be good to reflect on just where things are at and what's happening. This video also comes with a bit of an announcement, and I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about today, which was that I am pausing Throneless indefinitely for now. Definitely not considering the project terminated or anything like that, but I have decided to move back over to Insignia, which is good news. But obviously, not as exciting news for Throneless and for the fan base of Throneless fans. And I wanted to talk about why. So I've been working on Insignia, as you guys know, for a long time. The project started in 2014 as an idea. It wasn't until about, beginning of 2017 that I started considering full-time work on it. And, there have probably been about 6 months to 12 months in that span since then where I haven't worked on it. But it's been my major project since then. And I decided at the beginning of last year that I would spend a little bit more time on other projects to sort of soften the pressure that Insignia places on me. Obviously, as a solo project, Insignia is a huge undertaking, and it is something that as I worked on it, felt like there was an incredible amount of risk and pressure around the success of the game and the development of the game. So I started working on some side projects. That's where Arrowbound came from, and the last few side projects that I've worked on have all been Ludum Dare post-jam games. So, I would do a jam entry and then take that project further. And in many ways, the last two games that I've been working on, Arrowbound and Throneless, weren't even really about Ludum Dare at all. It was really just me wanting to experiment with smaller game ideas to see if there was any traction there or any value. And try to create some kind of familiarity for myself with the process of designing and releasing a game, because Insignia is otherwise going to be the first game I release. I didn't want that, so I wanted to have some experience with shipping something. With both cases, one of the biggest pressures that I've felt has been the manner of being able to scope my work, set a date on how long something's going to take me or an estimate, and actually meet that estimate. It's been incredibly difficult. And I think for any fledgling young game developer, that's something that is really difficult to do. And especially when you're by yourself, it's not something that you can really just do because you don't know how long things are going to take you, especially if it's a new idea, something that you haven't built before. You're going to be in a position where it's not necessarily just going to be estimable. On top of that, if it's a project that you're prepared to follow the creative process to design the game, there is almost necessarily going to be some time where you find the game as you're working on it, right? You might have some ideas about what's fun, but if you're not prepared to change those ideas and iterate on them for the sake of the game, well, you're probably not going to have the most fun game at the end. So, in a sense, budgeting time in a way that you expect to exactly meet a certain deadline on a certain feature or the game itself, it can be a negative thing. Personally, I've found always that the most natural thing has been to let the game sort of fill in the blanks as I'm working. And with Throneless, I really wanted to make something that I could fit inside of a 2-month to 3-month scope. There was almost no way I was going to be able to fit what I wanted to inside of Ludum Dare, but I hoped that I was getting a good start on the eventual 2 to 3 month project. I mean, 2 days is not that long, and I made a lot of progress. And in the time since then, I was making consistent positive progress, but in no way was I going to hit any kind of deadline that I had set in the initial period. And part of that was that, like the game just felt like it needed to be something a little bit different from where it was heading. Or as I would implement a feature like the combat, it made sense, for an RPG, okay, there needs to be something that you're progressing towards in the mid and long term, right? Those role-playing systems, being able to invest time into a character, into a place. I have this idea of basically there being almost a fractal of things that your attention span is kept, interested by. And that starts at the moment-to-moment combat, but then you've got, the lifespan of a character, the span of a dungeon that you might be fighting in, and then the overworld and the town that you're curating as you're building out, the progress of the game as you lead towards the finish, the boss. All of those things are basically stories that start at a very small scale, moment-to-moment combat and mechanics, to large scale across the whole game. And I think, naturally wanting to flesh that stuff out, the game kind of just, it begged for those things to be explored in that way, and for mechanics to be fleshed out. And I felt like there was a very natural game that was coming along. But very quickly, it was clear that, it's just too much for one person to make. And not just for me to make the game, but for me to make a game that's shippable, which is another thing that I've learned in the last little while. The game could be content complete, and then you might have another 50% of the project left in terms of polish and iteration and, getting it QA tested and maybe adding language support, marketing, release, post-release support, that kind of stuff. It's really not a trivial thing to release a game in any capacity. If you're releasing something, you want it to do well, and especially because there's that performance element to it, right? Because it's a job or something that you want to earn money from, if that's what you're trying to do, as I am, then the stakes are high even for something that you spent a couple of months on. Now, the other thing, other than the game just being difficult to scope, and that scope just being something that I discovered was more difficult or demanding than I was prepared to put in, the original ideas that I had going into the project that I wanted to explore, both the roguelike elements and the presentation values in general, just how the game played and felt, I made some sacrifices on those things in the beginning to basically whittle down the project into something that was more accomplishable by myself. So, basically not pursuing 3D. I really wanted to try something that was more 3D, closer to Octopath Traveler. And I really wanted the game to be more rogue-like, having time move when the character moves, the main character moves, and having all of the characters move at the same beat. That was something that I was very interested and curious in. And it just happened to be that it was going to be too much kind of like R&D work, too much work to try to make that fit inside of an RPG that was, team-based combat that fit inside of that Final Fantasy Tactics mold. And I gave it a good crack. I tried to squash it down into something that would fit. And I think, like I said, Throneless itself, it's going to be, fun if it ever gets finished. There's a game there, and it's a good game. But as I worked on it, it sort of made more sense the more I iterated on the mechanics that Throneless would be better as like a city sim. There's definitely a project there as well, having some sort of medieval isometric city builder. But unfortunately, I didn't budget time to really be able to pursue that kind of stuff. And I'd love to be able to pursue that stuff. The natural kind of course of that creative process is very exciting. But the way that things are, because I am working on Insignia in the long run, the longer I spend on a side project like that, the more I feel a sense of responsibility and like a tension in my day-to-day, that it's been this long since I've worked on Insignia. Is this project going to take up my whole year? Can I afford to do that? Is that something that I want to do? Is this something that my audience wants to see? It's one of those things that unfortunately, I can't escape that kind of mounting pressure. And so I made the decision to just park the project for now. The biggest positive takeaway that I can think of is that this is a demonstration that I'm capable of making an executive decision on something like this, despite kind of what I might be tempted to do. There's this sunk cost fallacy aspect where, but you've already spent so much time on it. Why would you give it up? There's that aspect, and I feel good about being able to say, well, no. One, I've dedicated these 2 months to exploring something. I've explored it, and it's time to wrap it up. And that it was okay, right? This is something that I've allowed for myself. And I think that is a healthy thing, right? I started taking on the side projects as a way of giving myself a bit of breadth of exposure to different kinds of games, going through the release cycle, becoming a bit of a better project manager and a producer, and kind of grooming myself to be more of a director. And although these have all been solo projects, I think this is an important kind of plot point, or like point in my resume, I guess. Just in terms of like the experiences that I've had. I'm personally quite happy about where I'm at the moment. Specifically, coming back to Insignia, I'm very excited for the next step that I'll be taking with Insignia. I came back this week and did some work on stream for it, and I really enjoyed the time that I spent there. I've sort of come back with a very renewed sort of eye for what I want and what I like in the game. That there's like a palette cleanse that happens, when you work on a different project for a couple of months. And I feel like I'm sort of really heading towards a quite a confident vision for the game's moment-to-moment aspects. I've been working with the systems for Insignia for years now, and one of the really, really major design elements, this is like a core storytelling intersection with game mechanics thing that's very subtle, but it's something that I noticed was dragging the game in a direction that I didn't realize I was uncomfortable with until probably the last 3 months. So I had started working on Insignia after playing a game called The Secret of Monkey Island, which is an adventure game, a point-and-click adventure game. And I don't often quote that game's mechanics as an inspiration for Insignia, but I alternatively would normally say something like a side-scrolling platformer, a Metroidvania, even something like Kingdom Hearts. Those are games that have informed the mechanics of Insignia. But specifically, there is a cinematic, photographic quality that adventure games have that a lot of those games don't. And it comes from the fact that adventure games are usually comprised of a series of scenes with a fixed camera perspective. Sometimes they scroll, that happens too, but oftentimes you're given a camera view that your character is in, and you walk around that view, and if you leave the scene, you enter a new space. And you get a new camera view. And that's something that with Insignia, as I've been working on it, at first I felt myself pressured to make these much larger scenes, allow the camera to scroll in both X and Y directions, and really have something that felt like an open space, an open world. But the more I've been working on it, I kind of felt like it was very unwieldy to work on those big scenes. And also they didn't represent the game that I was trying to build. They didn't allow me to frame spaces in quite as elegant a way. There are even technical constraints like thinking about how tiles meet up, different tile sets. If you have one tile set going into another in one big scene, you need to figure out how that seam works. But if you fade to black and open up into a new scene, it doesn't matter that those two tile sets in those two different environments are different, because you've kind of like done a hard cut and a reset. So Things like that are, it's not something that I really was aware of in the first couple of years of working on the game because I was just focusing on getting the systems down. And now that I'm more focused on telling the story and from a visual perspective telling the story, in addition to the fact that smaller scenes are much easier to actually validate, it's much easier to just build a small scene and say, yep, that's exactly what I want, tick, and move to the next one. Having the camera there and placeable and being able to create, custom foreground elements that frame the scene is something that I don't think, if I had worked on the game consistently in one long passage of time, I don't think that I would have come to that realization and been able to course correct without feeling like, oh no, I've already built too much of the game, I can't go back now and start breaking things down. So as long as this project has been, it's still kind of surprising how much there is to grow, as far as my vision for the project and learning about certain nuances, things that might change the way that you design the game. I mean, this is like a genre difference. The difference between an action adventure versus a Metroidvania, those are very different vibes. And I think in Insignia's case, this is something it's quite a positive to start shrinking those scenes down into more bite-sized compartments. I've got one more thing that I'll be working on this week on stream. I won't really talk about it here, but if you come on stream, I'll be working on a different thing for the duration of this week. And then next week we head into jam territory. So I'm really excited for the jam. We have over 1,000 entrants already. Like what? 1,000 people are going to be entering the first game jam I ever host. That's insane. I'll be spending that weekend doing a lot of like video hosting, hopefully, like running almost like a show where we follow a few different games, whoever's streaming what they're working on. And we can sort of do commentary and maybe not interviews, they might be busy working on the games, but I'd love to have almost like an Olympics, what do they call it? In the dugout, some kind of like telecast where we host the jam. So I'll be there all weekend doing that. If you have a specific plan to stream your entry and the creation of it, maybe drop a comment or hit me up with a PM or a DM, you could say, in Discord, and I'll see if there's a way I can create some sort of structure for how and when I choose who to follow on the weekend. So that's where I'm at. I hope you guys don't mind. I didn't really have a lot of motivation to edit one of my normal tutorials, but I do have the cloth physics tutorial coming, the second one for the cape. It's all shot and it's sort of half edited, but this has been a little vlog. In the meantime, hope you have a lovely weekend, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.